Don't worry, guys, I'm not doing any stool repairs today. If you were here last week, I got in my hardware phase. There's lots of trees up here. Okay, Mike stands up. I'm coming back down. All right. Wow, it's been an exciting morning so far, hasn't it? Baptism. Thank you for those words from Elise earlier. You know, it's exciting to be part of a church, and it's exciting to see that God is working in and through the life of our community, no matter what circumstances they are. And what I also love, even about what Elise shared earlier, this sense of movement that occurs here in Alice Springs. You know, lots of effort, lots of movement, lots of work, and lots of impact for God, which is really, really exciting. And as I was mentioning last week, as I commenced this series in Titus, this was a context where Paul identified that the place called Crete, this island of Crete, was a work in progress, and that is what we are as well, and therefore we need to be learning what it looks like for us to embrace the missional opportunities and the God opportunities that exist here in Alice Springs, recognizing that we don't have it all together, but there is a great opportunity on hand. I'm not going to speak too long today because we've got so much in the service, but I just want to provide a really quick refresher on what we covered last week so that we can lead into these next 4 verses, because last week we did 4 verses and this week we're doing 5. But we're going to just kind of lead a little bit more into that. So just a reminder from last week, in case you need a little refresher or perhaps you weren't here, the things that we identified from Titus chapter 1 were we speak with authority and maximize our influence and impact when we know our who, our what, and our why. And that's what we learned from Paul in chapter 1. He identifies himself first and foremost, even before saying to Titus, even before directing his letter to its particular person in mind. He identifies who he is in God. He identifies who he is. He identifies what he is called to do practically, and he identifies why he is called to do it. Because he knows that if he's going to speak with authority and influence and impact into a work in progress, he needs to identify himself. Because it is that kind of clarity that leads to fruitfulness, okay? Clarity leads to fruitfulness. And as Elise mentioned before, John 15, we see that abiding, pruning, growing, and fruitfulness understanding that exists in John 15 as we, as followers of Jesus, remain connected to the vine, which is Jesus. We're all going to go through these seasons. We're all going to be part of these seasons. You might even identify yourself as in one of these seasons at the moment. But nevertheless, the goal is fruitfulness. And God, that's what God has for us. And so with this understanding of Paul identifying who he is, we actually start getting into some of his directives here in Titus chapter 1. He says in verse 5 to Titus, "The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished." So he makes it explicit. Some work has been done, there is still work to do, and I'm leaving you there because there is still work that I need you to do. And we spoke about Crete as this place of incredible missional opportunity with ports and cities that were ready to multiply, right? Crete was going to be this hub of movement for the Christian faith, and Paul didn't want to lose that opportunity, even in spite of the challenges that they were going to face there, which was first and foremost Cretan culture, right? This kind of mercenary, barbaric, I'm only after myself, no loyalty kind of culture. He's like, we've got to tackle that head on, right? Because God is wanting to use this place in spite of the odds, in spite of the resistance, in spite of the challenges for my missional purposes. Does that seem familiar to any of you? That God might want to use a particular place, a particular people, in spite of the odds, in spite of the challenges, to do his missional work? I hope that's familiar to you, okay? Because that's what was going on here in Crete, and this is what we can learn from as we explore what Paul has to say to Titus. And so you might ask the question, well, what was left unfinished? Well, it continues. What was left unfinished? And appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So this is actually, in terms of what Paul is tasking Titus with, this is actually where it starts. The thing that was left unfinished was that in Crete, there was a lack of leadership in position. There was a lack of leadership and people in position to provide these kind of imitatable examples, right, for the people. Because right here, they had to protect and this growing movement of churches that were happening across Crete, right? And so there was this danger that while these churches were multiplying, if there weren't these leaders in position, these people that you could look at and get direction from and imitate your life after, that eventually these churches would become weaker and weaker and weaker. They'd become more and more distracted, more and more fractured, more and more not in line with what God actually planned for them to be, which would essentially mean the whole multiplication issue would be no good. In fact, what would be multiplied, what would be extended, would actually be something that was less than what God had planned for this church and for this island. And so the instruction that Paul gives Titus is that the thing that he needs to do, the priority thing he needs to do, is to appoint elders. Now, you might even have a kind of some baggage associated with this word elders. Little e elders here, okay? Elders, that is people of significant leadership, right? In every town, okay? Not just one person. In every town, there needs to be these elders, right? Because that is what Paul is directing. And it's fascinating, actually, even from a ecclesiological, that is a church thinking understanding, that Paul here was appointing one guy, Titus, to appoint these people. In fact, some translations even say ordain an elder in every town. And so he was commissioned with this task. He was given his what? Right? He was given his what? So let's just read through it. He goes on and talks about what this elder, this person of leadership significance, ought to carry. An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe or are trustworthy, some translations say, and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient. Since an overseer, again another word for this elder, manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message, as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. So he said, your task is to appoint these elders in every town, and these are the kind of criteria. These are the criteria that we need for these people who are going to have leadership significance, because these are going to be the people these churches are looking to provide them with a physical, living example of what it looks like to follow Jesus. And not only that are they going to shed that example in terms of their character, they also have responsibility to pass on the message that has been taught and refute and challenge those who seek to compromise that message. So there's this beautiful combination here of both character. You need to have a person of deep, godly character, but you also need someone who has the competency or the skill to be able to articulate the message and actually challenge those who actually are seeking to twist it and turn it into something that it's not supposed to be. Now, of course, there's some significant kind of context around this. We've got, obviously, in this case, we've got men who have been appointed in this context, which is a big deal, particularly in Crete at the time, because the men were in the power position, and therefore they were those with authority. And so, therefore, there was this sense in which we've got to look to those who currently have authority, because they're going to be the ones that we imitate. And so we see Paul describing this kind of discernment criteria that Titus is to use. And I want to just for today, for the limited time we have, to focus on just one phrase in the midst here, which I think kind of captures many of these qualities, right, that we could see in this list. We could go through them one by one and be like, hey, how are we doing on this and this and that and that? And you can do that in your own time. But I love this phrase, one who loves what is good. What does it mean to be the kind of leader, the kind of influence in our world who loves what is good? Now, I suppose for me, the things that I was reminded of, particularly as we consider our current society, is this question of how do we discern what is good? Because in reality, the question of goodness or what is acceptable, what is true, these have all kind of been thrown up and around about, particularly in more recent times. Subjectivism, that my perspective is true and my story is correct and no one can challenge that, is certainly the kind of language that we see kind of used today. It's like, but the thing is, if we don't have a point of reference, if we don't actually have something to refer to, then goodness is just subjective, right? Goodness is maybe what makes me feel good. Goodness is maybe what achieves the outcomes that I want. That's what makes something good. But no. What we see here in love's what is good, particularly in Paul's instruction to Titus, is this understanding that the point of reference, that is, using the discernment of the Holy Spirit, is the one who determines what is good and true, rather than this kind of subjective goodness where I can decide what is true. He makes it very clear that there are certain things that are good and things that are not. To be overbearing or quick-tempered or drunk or violent or pursuing dishonest gain, these things aren't good, even if they make you feel good, even if they achieve kind of outcomes that you're looking for. Perhaps even if they achieve some sort of admirable end in mind that we're using to justify the behavior in the present. Actually, what we need from our leaders, what we need from our influencers, particularly in our context where there is a work in progress, is character. Character that knows what it means to love what is good. I also love that in verse 8 here it talks about hospitality. Hospitality is about celebrating what is good. Okay, celebrating really, really well. And I love that idea of inviting people in. This isn't like I stand at a distance and judge. Hospitality is inviting people in, because what happens when you invite people in, you get a true picture of people, right? You can be whoever you want from a distance. Social media has taught us that. But you get up and close with someone, you invite people into your world, they then can see the true you. Okay? It's risky. It's vulnerable. It's dangerous to be hospitable. Okay? And yet these are the kind of characteristics that are needed in these elders, these significant leaders, because they want to be Paul and Titus want to be absolutely sure that these people are going to carry the mantle of both godly character and skills that are required to allow this message to multiply. And it's not going to be happening from a distance. Even Paul knows that. He's commissioning Titus on the ground. And then Titus is going to be commissioning and ordaining people who are even closer to the action. Okay? This is about being in people's worlds. And I think that particularly here in Alice, but certainly across the world, when we start to discern where our work in progress is, where God has uniquely called us to make a contribution, the temptation is always to try and do things from a distance, but what God is calling is for leaders to push in, to demonstrate vulnerability, to step into those places that can hurt us, but where we can only be honest with others. Like I said, there's character and there's skills and competency required for this leadership role. And I just want to show you something, and I apologize in advance if you're not kind of a strategic kind of mind, but this is a helpful thing to consider as we think about who are the elders, those significant leaders that we both need to see and we need to be within our work in progress. You see, because character and skills need to work together. This is why Paul, right, makes it clear to Titus that when you're looking for these people, they need to be both people of godly character, but also have the ability to communicate the message. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but we can kind of work out in our mind, but if someone has great character but doesn't have kind of skills or competency, they're only going to be able to have a limited amount of impact, right? That's just kind of how it works. You can be a person of great character and be loving, but if you don't know how to love well or multiply that well or use your energies well, your impact is going to be good, but it's going to be limited to a particular space. Now, of course, if you are very, very skilled in something such as communication, but you have low character, then you are a dangerous person. Okay? History shows us this. Okay? People with great skill and great abilities, right, to do amazing things, to start movements, but if there isn't the godly character behind it, it becomes a movement of hate and violence. Okay? There is incredible, unlimited, in fact, potential for harm when you have a person with a lot of skill but no character. I'll get to the apathy and death in a second when you've got no character and no skill. But what we're looking for, right, and what Paul is asking Titus to identify is these people of high character and high skill or high competency. It's like you need both. Because if you have both, there is unlimited potential for kingdom impact. And we know, right, from Jesus' teaching, the parable of the mustard seed, the nature of the kingdom is to expand and grow and to do amazing things, but we need to be positioned and be actually planting that seed in order for it to do its work. And so we need to be developing and identifying both skills and character if we are to be these kind of leaders who, like the church in Crete, would identify, learn from, look to for discernment and movement. I wonder if even right now you look at this grid and maybe you're like, oh, it looks too maths-like, but get the heart behind this, right? I wonder if you think about in your world, who is a person of great character and great skill that you really admire? Great character and great skill. It's like, who is that person or those people who you know that they have integrity, and the closer you get, the more real you're going to experience them, and you're actually going to be more delighted by the fact that you can be close to them. But they're also people who you know God has equipped them with skills to make a difference, and you're excited by the difference they're making. Their difference doesn't look like this person's difference or whatever. They're just doing whatever God has called them to in their who, what, and why. But you know that they've got these kind of characteristics. Maybe you've been blessed enough to be a recipient of some of that character and competency and that impact. I know in my world, I consider so many people, I'm like, they love what is good. They love what is good. They're a person of great character and they love what is good. They are wanting to share it and use it, that God might be glorified through it. Because what are the alternatives? If this is what Paul is looking to Titus to appoint these people, what are the alternatives? Well, the alternatives are really these kind of low competency, low character kind of apathy and death kind of outcomes. I mean, the alternative to loving what is good is to be indifferent about what is good. Okay, it's like, I don't care what is good. It's called apathy, right? Or to love what is bad, which just leads to death. Apathy and death, they're kind of the alternatives, right, to loving what is good. And so you can see how the importance of why Paul is saying, hey, godly character and godly skill. I mean, where there is a lack of Christ-like leadership, apathy and death will have a hold. This is the truth. Where there is a lack of Christ-like leadership, apathy and death will have a hold. You may not see it in the moment, right? But that's the trajectory. And you might even be currently experiencing this to various degrees in your workplace or family life. And these places are crying out for people of character and competency. They're like crying out for people of Christ-like leadership. Remember, by comparison, the Cretians were known as disloyal mercenaries. This is what they were working with. Liars, gluttons. This is how they are described. And this wasn't just a list of character flaws. This was actually happening all around Titus and these churches in real time. This is who they were up against, or those they were perhaps seeking to reach. Okay? And so to identify and try and find this type of leader, this type of elder, and to appoint them, right, was something that was completely countercultural, especially in Crete. So what does that mean for us here in Alice? Because there's so many of our contexts that we find ourselves where we see the anti-elder, so to speak, qualities. Wild and disobedient, or children wild and disobedient, blameless, overbearing, quick-tempered, given to drunkenness, violent, pursuing dishonest gain. I mean, we see what happens when good leaders aren't in place. And I feel like first and foremost as a church, we need to be praying. Because God is going to be calling us to a who, what, and why, where we can uniquely make a contribution. But there's all sorts of places we know in our worlds and in our workplaces that are crying out for this kind of leadership, for this kind of influence, for someone to step up in a Christ-like way and be that light. To be that hope, to be that person of both character and skill. We need elders. We need elders in all our contexts. And so we need to be praying against this kind of culture that exists and into the kind of leadership that those who are committed to Christ can offer. Hospitality, loving what is good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. The ability to encourage others and refute those who oppose sound doctrine. I wonder where it is that your mind wanders when you think about where elders ought to rise up. Wherever that is that your mind wanders, a workplace context, family, an environment, location, can I encourage us first and foremost to be praying into that, right? Praying into it. God, would you raise up these people? Because you want to do a work of multiplication through this work in progress. That is your heart. Fruitfulness is the end point. We know that from John 15. But where's it going to start? Well, Paul had an understanding that particularly in Crete, it was identifying those people, those Cretans, who had these qualities, who were countercultural to their environment, and who they could support in playing this role in the church as it multiplied. You see, it might be that we look to these elders. That might be our act. We look to these elders and we learn from them, but there's also a challenge for us to become these elders. And I'm not just talking about titles that are given here in a church or somewhere else, okay? Because yes, there are elders that are appointed, but there are elders or these kind of peoples that are needed in every setting. Every setting requires these kind of elders. God wants to use you as an elder type figure in these settings. So it's time for us to step up. For some of us, the call is to be that kind of elder figure within the work in progress that God has called us to be in. Perhaps as you take on that challenge of being the elder, you're like, oh man, I've got to grow in character because I know that actual area is something I've got to work on. Cool, pray into that. If that's the thing God's challenging you in, then pray into that. Allow God to transform your heart. Pushing deeper into Him. Patience, kindness. It might be that you're like, well, yeah, actually, I haven't really thought about like skills and competency, but you know what? To be an elder within my environment, I probably need some more conflict management skills. I probably need to learn to articulate truth a little bit better. And that's my work in progress. And I'm actually thinking that in my context, that's the role that the elder needs to take. And my character is it's good, like it's getting there, you know. I feel like I'm okay with God there, but there's some areas that I actually want to improve on so that I can be more effective in this place. Because God's heart is for fruitfulness in every work in progress. And I do want to take this opportunity in these last couple of minutes to thank the elders, both past and present, even in this church, okay? Because the role of an elder in this spiritual community is a really, really important one. So I just want to say thank you for the support of me in this season and in the past few years. But also I know that throughout the history of Alice Springs Baptist Church, elders have played a significant role in being these people of character and skill in the ups and downs and the challenges that every church faces, but this church has faced. So thank you, elders and OLT, and our full leadership team as well, for playing that role here in this church. So what's our takeaway? In these few verses where Paul instructs Titus to finish what has been started and to appoint these elders, these leaders of both character and skill, we too, as we consider our work in progress, should consider what does it look like to see the person or be the person who loves what is good. What does it look like to see the person? Maybe you're in that position where you need to just see them. I need to be the one who looks for these elders, for these people of significance in my world, because that's where God's got me at right now. I need to grow as a result of imitating them. Or maybe it is, and I feel like this could be the case for many of us in different contexts, it's actually time to step up. And official or unofficial, it doesn't matter, okay? To step up and be the elder or that person of significance that is needed in that context to be countercultural to be countercultural, to step in, draw people close to see the real you, and then allow the Christ-likeness and the message of God to shine through. Because remember, multiplication, God's desired outcome for these places is fruitfulness. And he invites us to play a part in that. So I'm actually just going to invite you just to take a minute of silence as you consider, where is my work in progress? And wherever that is, am I called to see or am I called to be the elder within that setting? And then pray. Pray that you will be obedient. And then pray that God would raise up elders both in your context and others. Let's take a minute. Jesus, we want to thank you for these words of Paul to Titus, because it gives us a real tangible call to what you need within challenging environments to see your gospel, your message of victory over death and life in the Spirit shared and experienced both in these contexts and beyond them. And so God, I especially want to pray for those of us for whom our work in progress feels too overwhelming. Because I have no doubt that Titus was feeling the same way with Crete. And I just want to pray for your spiritual provision. Lord, that you would raise up leaders, but you would also raise up us. Not so that we can have power. It's all for your glory, God. But that so that we can be light and life in these places that so desperately need them. And so God, use us, we pray. We seek your heart, know you, and live out the calling you've placed upon us. In here in Alice Springs and across the nation and across the nations of the world. In your name.